So, we've been having just a rich time here talking about our art practices and all kinds of big ideas. But I thought a place where we might start would be to like to put out a very practical question to the three of you, which is simply this: that in the day to day of your life, how do you behold beauty? Like, what are some of your habits and practices? I'm pretty confident you each have some, but how is it that you train your attention to behold beauty? And so maybe when does it happen as a matter of fact in your own practice, but then some of the ways that you're surprised by that. And we'll go back and forth about that bit. I think it'd be helpful to everyone gathered here to just hear how you make that work over, many years of working in your practice as poet, musician, painter, writers. So whoever wants to go first.
I can start.
All right.
I am a poet. My name is Chrissy Clute. If you weren't in my workshop, it's nice to be here with you all. For me, I as a poet, in some ways, it's word hunting. Watching for phrases in books or overheard on the street, words that capture me, and I jot them down. But honestly, my most regular practice is taking photos. I have, a pocket camera with me at all times, and I've found that though part of me hesitates because I know beauty is can't really be captured by an iPhone camera in its full extent. There's something about the act of framing it in that I could probably do it just with my fingers, but choosing the frame and what to leave out and what to keep in that helps me attend to the smaller beauties in my place in a really different way. And then those photos often will spark my writing and poetry later. But something about taking a photo for me is what helps me zoom my vision into something that's at a size that I can take it in differently than if I'm just looking at a whole landscape.
Thank you. And I'm just reminded that we haven't had these little devices where we can take hundreds of pictures so easily, right? So there's something about us adapting to the media and the world that we're in, right? And sort of, not your words, but mine, repurposing even or putting it to a certain kind of use. Yeah, thank you. All of a sudden, Bruce and me are being shy and polite over here.
No, I mean, it's embarrassingly simple for me, which is on any given day, just closing my eyes. I mean, most of my days I start in silence, and I'm an early riser. I inherited German farmer genes. So I wake up at 5 a.m. every day, whether I want to or not. It doesn't matter when I went to sleep. And I sit in the dark. I don't turn a light on. I just sit by myself, and I wait until the birds come to the feeder. Um, and usually the first thing I really see are the birds at the feeder, and just I have no I have no words to describe it. But it's a daily it's a maybe that's what I want to say is that for me encountering beauty is a daily mundane quotidian thing. It isn't the exotic thing that I'm after ever, really. It's just the daily miracles that are constantly unfolding. Um,
Cameron always comes up with these questions, right? Like I'd say, it's like, whoa, I really have to think about this. It's funny, I'm actually a fairly ADD person. And I think the formation, my husband and I have 4 kids, and so there was a lot of multitasking going on for a long time, and switching between different mental channels. And so for a very long time, for me, the day starts. I actually, read scripture and pray. But while my kids were younger, there was a whole, a few years there where I could just barely utter a prayer, right, in the morning because lunches had to be packed and kids are up early. And so it kind of fractured the ability to meditate in the morning. And then when COVID hit, I realized that I really needed to focus on my prayer life and figure out like what was the best way to pray. So where I'm going with this is that ultimately I realized that I'm an extrovert, and my husband would say I could have told you that a long time ago, but he's an introvert. But anyways, I realized that praying with other people is how I behold beauty. And so I started joining all these prayer groups, and then I had like 7 a week, right? I know, right? And I thought, why am I like doing so many of these? And then I realized it's actually as I listen to people pray and I listen to the silences between the words and their struggle to create a sentence that captures the yearnings of their hearts, I felt like I was being in the presence of God, right? Like the Holy Spirit was clearly teaching me something through that, to behold the making, if you will, in something that we might consider as being very ordinary. But I've continued this practice, so I'm still in a lot of groups, and and I learned so much from people by listening to how they pray. The silence, it's the rhythm of it, the melody of it.
Mm-hmm.
And you can tell all of a sudden people are like, amen, or yeah, like that. And you're like, okay, why did that like really hit something, right? What was it about that expression that moved people? So anyways.
And I think I'll dare to answer my own question. Raised in the background and tradition I was in the sort of pious Protestantism, there was always this emphasis on having, a daily quiet time and praying and reading scripture, which I believe in and have tried to practice. But prayer was often such a frustration to me. And then I started jotting things down. This was probably 40 years ago, and just then became a regular journal keeper, which really is prayer for me. But as a maker, I needed to see something. I needed to know that I'd done some work, and just sort of sitting quietly left me feeling impatient and unproductive. And you could talk to me about the need to be productive later, but not right now. And then that process of journaling and then sort of keeping them in an organized way, but not in any legal way. I only journal on the days that I have time and I feel moved to do it, which is usually several times a week, if not more. And out of that, I actually became a writer. I knew I was a studio visual artist, but I became a writer along the way because of that habit of attending, I think. Following on this theme of beholding beauty, is there some recent time, kind of in line with the questions we put out to this group last night for them to reflect on, you all to reflect on, have you had a moment in recent days or months when you feel like you've beheld beauty in some fresh or important way for yourself, in any kind of mode or media, any life experience? But have you had a recent beholding experience?
I'll go. I moved recently back to Wisconsin after 18 years in California. And so this is my first winter in a very long time. And I actually love winter, but spring has been really challenging because March and April in the place I lived a year ago and 18 years before that is green and lush and everything's blooming. And you walk out the door and the citrus is all blooming and the jasmine. So the air everywhere just smells like flowers. And I'm like, it's still brown. It's still brown. How is it still brown? I don't remember spring being so brown. So the other day, though, I went out into my backyard and noticed alongside this little rocky area, there are these tiny little white flowers on these hairy purple stems. I think they're liverwort. And I was so excited to just, it was like, oh, here it is. Here's life. It's blooming. It's coming. And those little tiny flowers were really good for my green, thirsty heart right now.
We have our share of winter stories from Boston, right? The frozen chosen, right, if you will. Yeah, we endure.
Not so much
Chosen, yeah, more frozen than chosen.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. So I was walking along the lake. For those of you who were in our workshop or the working session now, we just came from. My apologies for the repetition, but I was just walking out along the lake here, Lake Mendota, and just overwhelmed by the beauty of the lake as it interacts with the shore, and all the students were out running and boating and sailing, and it was a sight to behold. So that was part one, that's linked to here. But during this Lenten season, I've actually been studying Bach's St. Matthew Passion. And I feel quite guilty, actually, in the studying because I've always been somewhat of a critic of the church in terms of its reluctance to embrace the sacred music tradition, because we have like one of the richest expressions of beauty in sacred music. But I thought, you know what? I better put my money where my mouth is and devote some time to this work during this Lenten season. So, and being asked to talk about it also helps, doesn't it? Like if you have an assignment, it prods you to do it. So, have been doing that. And there's this aria called Erbarme dich, which is where Peter, after denying Christ 3 times, he weeps bitterly, right? And it's this most gorgeous aria with a sense of remorse that is beyond word. I mean, I can't even begin to describe it. I mean, how many times have I read Matthew 26 and 27, understand the whole passion story? But boy, did that animate the depth of remorse and regret. Not self-hatred, but hatred of the sin. It was so powerful. Anyways, that's where I go.
Well, Cam knows this because he actually honored me by writing about this. But a recent encounter with beauty that I had over a period of months was a couple of years ago. Well, backstory: a couple of years ago, a big old apple tree that was 120 years old and it had not been pruned or cultivated for over a century. As a result, it grown big and spraggly, and it became a tree for climbing and playing. And my grandchildren all played in it over the years on my son's property. And then about 2 winters ago, it came down on a big nor'easter, which is a terrible New England storm that can sometimes blow things down. And he was going to chop it up for firewood, and I said, no, cut it into logs, and I'll come up. He lives up in Maine. I'll come up and we'll load it on your trailer, and we'll take it to a sawmill and have it planked, turned into wooden planks. And he said, okay. So we did that. And the sawmill guy looked at us, because there's this weird tree. And he's thinking, I'm going to put that on my sawmill. Wow. And he said, okay, all right. So I came back about 2 weeks later, and he had very lovingly and very carefully teased out of this twisted set of logs that we brought to him some beautiful planks of apple wood, all about 2 inches thick, 1.5 inches, 2 inches thick. I loaded them in the back of my truck. It completely filled up my pickup and made it this very heavy, dense wood. Anyway, make a long story short, my plan was to take that wood once it was cured, and seasoned, turn it into finished boards, and then make something for my grandchildren out of it, all of whom had played in that tree. Mm-hmm. It happens to be the tree also that was in a painting of mine, in 4 paintings of mine in my quartets project, one of which shows my grandson in the tree. I don't know if we had it on the screen or not. I can't remember if I showed it on the screen or not. But anyway, it's the same tree. And when I was working with that wood, I love working with wood. When I was working with that apple wood, it dulls your saw blade very quickly because it's so dense. So it was a real bear to work with, but it was so incredibly beautiful. The figure in that wood, the grain patterns, and just breathtakingly beautiful. And the boxes that I made for my grandchildren turned out beautifully because of what was in that tree, the sunlight that had been trapped in that tree, the years of growth and bearing of fruit. And yeah, it was just, oh, I wrote a children's book story about the tree too, and self-published it, exactly the right shape and size to fit inside each one of the boxes. So, but anyway, that tree, the grain pattern in that wood was just, it's still working on me. And that project was over with by before Christmas. So.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to some of the questions here on the screen now. Here's some questions you're asking. First, how do we as Christian artists make work from a posture of serving and worshiping the Lord without being pulled away by the impulse for self-promotion and self-glory? So I don't think we all need to answer each of these questions, but if that, and you can see the question up on the screen yourself here, but, I guess they're behind me now. All right. So how do we maintain a posture of serving and service and worship? Or is that a value?
Well, I'll go. I think the format that I presented last night of sort of talking about a work, interacting with it, and demonstrating portions and then playing it actually evolved out of a kind of dissonance that I had with just the performance medium itself. Just like kind of wondering why, I'm sitting here on a stage, everyone is looking at you and listening. I'm not even facing them, I'm turning sideways and just kind of, sharing the music, yes. And the music is extraordinary stuff, right? That's been composed. But yet there was something missing in that mode of performance for me. And so I think that's why I realized the opportunity to enhance the appreciation and understanding, perhaps trigger some questions and curiosity towards further pursuit and engagement with the music, was sitting right there. And I just really wanted to incorporate that as an extension of, vocation, and saying, why am I in music to begin with, right? And that's sort of where I've landed.
One thing that immediately comes to my mind, Cam, and I don't know who asked this question, but is going to sound a little bit, not snarky, but a little bit negative. I actually don't think it makes any difference if you're a Christian. And I'll say why. Because I know so many artists who are not believers who nevertheless experience this self-loss in the process of making. It's very profound. A kind of eclipse of the self takes place in the making of a work of art. I think it's a universal experience of human beings in making, and I think it's actually, I'm thinking this out loud, so it may not make a lot of sense. I think it's the image of God pressing forward in our act of making, and not actually eclipsing our ego, our kind of self-promotional, chattering self that wants to be heard and wants to be paid attention to and so forth and get lots of money and fame. I think what happens in that process of genuine making is you discover your true self, but it's not the self you can cling to. It's not something you can promote. It's not something you can monetize. I think that's a universal experience among artists of every sort, whether they're Christians or not. I think the big difference could be, if Christians cared to act on it, is that we know the source of that beautiful eclipse of the narrow, egoistic self. And we can turn, as Augustine said, he had been seeing everything that was illuminated by the light until he turned and faced the light and realized the source of the light. We can turn toward God. I mean, But I don't think it makes any difference whether you're a Christian or not in making art. You're going to, if you're doing it, if you're really doing it, you're not just simply, manufacturing stuff willy-nilly. But if you're really entering into the process of making a work of art, you're going to experience that self-loss.
Thank you. And I'm going to turn to Chrissy and try to fine-tune this question a little bit. I'm wondering if there's a difference here between self-promotion or self-glory. What I'm thinking about is, we had coffee a while ago, and you're really trying to make a go of it as a poet and a writer and make a living out of this, right? And so, all four of us would say there is some kind of self-promotion or something you have to be a part of. You can't just sort of hide away and hope the world's going to find you, right? And so, you were talking about your business plan and the way it's going, and these days, if you hope to publish a book, the publisher is going to say, well, who do you know, and what market is this for, and what networks do you belong to? It's no longer just, well, here's my book, now do something wonderful with it. So maybe you could speak to that a little bit, just because, you're trying to make your livelihood from being a writer and a poet and a teacher.
Thanks, Cam. And this is really just an extension, I think, of what you were saying this morning about sharing our work. There's two steps to the artistic life. There's making the work, which you just addressed really beautifully, and I wholeheartedly agree. It is this sort of, I think it's D.H. Lawrence who says, not I, but the wind that blows through me. There is this sort of letting go of self and letting the divine move through you. And then there's the sharing of it, which is very different and can feel mercenary. It can feel self-promoting. And yet, at its best, it is an act of hospitality. Your work will not draw anyone into mystery, into love, into divine presence if it's sitting in your drawer. And I think at its best, sharing our art and even promoting our art it's a way of stepping into a community. I've really found this as a writer, the best way to make connections, to network, you could say, is to honestly engage with someone else's writing, to share it with other people, to tell them what you love about it, and to find your way into a community of people that's putting thoughtful work in the world by being curious. It's a lot more effective when you're connecting someone to be interested than to be interesting. And I think artists often fall into this, well, I need to be really interesting because that's the thing that's going to make people want to know about my work. But if you can set that aside and be honestly interested in what other people are working on, what questions they're engaging with, what they're learning from their practice, you're helping create this network, this community of people who encourages each other on in the work. And then it just keeps growing because we see the work and then it inspires our own work. And that's where the beauty of art just continues.
I love that. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Next question, I'm just going to read it off the screen. How do we avoid artistic elitism while creating connection around beauty when so many media are not themselves simple, like classical piano, but I'd say any of the things any of you do, not simple, require usually education, training, experience to understand fully. If our goal is costly simplicity, does that have to apply to the form itself? So it's a multi-level question here. We'll do our conference next year on this whole question. But maybe you have some thoughts about this. So the need for training and all those activities, and yet a desire for simplicity. What do you think?
Well, I should just quickly clarify that when I was trying to articulate this aspect of the transcendent nature of beauty, this costly simplicity is not necessarily mean something lacking in complexity. I mean, there's a paradox there. But the visible universe is immensely complex. And yet there's a unity that you can see if you have eyes to see, that ties it all together. So I think it takes tremendous education to be a good scientist. But you're ultimately looking for, like Einstein was always looking for this big unifying theme that would bring all these disparate physical laws together, because he had this urge. Why? Why did he want to find a unified field theory? I think we're all pressing for that. We sense that it's there. We sense that, well, those of us who know God and love God will address the Lord in the creation. But I think it takes immense knowledge. I mean, someone said this morning, I had said everyone's born an artist, not everybody outgrows it. But I should tell a story. I was at a dinner party once, and obviously it was a lot of people. One guy was having a disagreement with a friend. He said, "Bruce, come here. You're going to settle this disagreement." He said, "Bob says everybody's an artist, and I'm saying I'm not so sure about that. What do you say?" And I said, "Yep, everybody's an artist, and everybody's a brain surgeon, and I'd like to practice on you." And
how did that operation go? I'm just curious.
It's a complicated question, I think, but it does. I think what I'm hearing, the overtones of it are really with words like elitism, the lack of access, right? Maybe that there's a certain privilege, if you will. Maybe it's not democratized, or an opportunity that everyone can experience. I think that's the result of our systems, right? Which in America, like when you go to Europe, classical music is just the stuff of everybody. You see on cabs, or at least this was years ago when, there were LPs and CDs. You see advertisements of, Mitsuko Yoshida's latest Mozart recordings on a cab door, right? You would never see that here. It's not part of the musical vernacular here. But what is embedded in our culture is access for all, which I'm a great supporter of. But I want to give people access to building and being equipped in the understanding, appreciation, and the making of music, right? But not necessarily to say, it doesn't require anything. It does require a lot, and it's costly. It's a word that's come up many times, right? There's a heavy price to it, but let's afford that opportunity to pay that price for everyone, regardless of where you're from, or your background.
And I wonder too, looking at this question, if it would be helpful to separate the word excellence from elitism. I think they're often conflated, and I think that creates a sort of problem for us. I think most of us who are in this business are desiring to do our very best and pursue excellence. And I think that's full of virtue, actually. Maybe when it crosses over into some of these other categories, it becomes really problematic, like self-promotion, like we were talking about before, or wanting to do it just for the few and not the many. But do we have another question, Dan? Oh, this is a good one. I was going to ask it if it didn't pop up. What is your advice for young, aspiring artists? What's your advice? I wanted to ask the question because you've all maintained a practice of writing and painting and performing music for a while now. So what would you advise, well, any of us, I suppose, who are aspiring here, but practical advice?
Play your scales. Or whatever form the scales are in whatever discipline you do.
So what are your scales in your world, Bruce?
Well, it's discipline, it's commitment, it's painting through the problem rather than hoping to overthink it and somehow fix it by thinking about it and not actually doing it. You have to paint, in my craft, you have to paint your way through a blockade or some kind of dysfunction or something that's not working. The only way you're going to work it out is by painting it out. You're not going to, figure it out and then execute it, at least not in my craft. But I think, the big advice that older artists have to give younger artists is you just have to keep going. You never quit. It's not an option. And another thing I would just say, you're never going to find time for this. You're not. You have to make time for it.
And making that time means not doing other things.
Yep.
Not being on every channel, these days I find, someone will come to me excited about a new book they've read and say, "You've got to read this book." And more and more I'll say, I would like to read it, but I probably can't because I have these other things I need to read right now that I need to keep my focus there. It's very difficult because everything looks so interesting to me all the time, and I'm finding myself I'm politely excusing myself from things more and more, so I can stay after what I think my work is. How about two of you?
Yeah, I agree with Bruce about the scales. So we've had conversations about this previously, but I think we kind of separate sort of the transcendent, the spiritual, the abstractions, the moment of enlightenment and inspiration from what we consider to be the mundane, daily routine aspects of being an artist. But there is something, I think, in our physiology, just like in practicing scales, the connection that physical doing actually primes the brain to be inspired, because scales are like the alphabet of music making, and scales are universal to every form, every cultural, expression through music. And so practicing those primes the pump, if you will. And one of the great examples, Jaime Laredo, who's a fabulous violinist, I just learned from a colleague, Steve Tenenbaum, who's a brilliant violist at Curtis. He was saying, Jaime practices 90 scales 90 minutes a day. Jaime's like in his 80s, right? He practices scales 90 minutes every day without fail. And I was like, that's remarkable, which is why he can play the way he does still in his old age.
Right, and when you're 90, if you don't, your fingers are just going to harden up.
But see, that's the thing. And there is the physical aspect of it, right? Your fingers do harden up, but there also is something in the muse that also turns into concrete, And so you have to you can't bypass. So this is why, like, this whole move towards artificial intelligence is slightly troubling to me. Well, not slightly, but very, very troubling to me, because I think we like the path of least resistance and pain. That's a very human tendency. So we're going to eliminate a lot of things that are actually for our benefit in the long term in our creativity. Like, I think about writing too, and how some of these ChatGPT or whatever is actually going to prevent us from being as excellent in our expression and communication as a result.
AI is probably just like every other tool, right? You can use a hammer to drive nails, or you can use it to murder somebody, but it's just a tool.
Yeah.
The trouble is AI is going to make up, because the way we're wired.
Yes.
We're going to become the ultimate consumers. I mean, that's what AI does. It turns you into a passive blob if you don't know how to use it properly. But it's just a tool.
We are at time, I'm sorry to say. And a few things I just want to say to close us out. You received a handout in the brochure. I just want to highlight May 16 and 17. We have a remarkable poet, Scott Cairns, coming here doing a poetry reading and a writing workshop May 16 and 17. If you're new to us or haven't been here for a while, we have, it's our 10th anniversary. There's a booklet on the way out. You can grab hold of this and just learn about our work here at the foundation. And I think there's still a few copies of Bruce Herman's book available out there. I bet if you ask Bruce to sign it, he would probably do that for you. So we'd love to make sure you get one of those for your $20 donation. So finally, I just want to thank everyone here on the panel for your wisdom and your practice and all that flows from your life into ours. I want to thank the workshop presenters. I've heard great things about the other four that I wasn't in. They sounded wonderful. We have an arts working group here at the foundation. Kate, Barry, Kangwan, Leslie, Susie. Where are you all? Can you just stand up kind of for us? Yeah, right. And we meet every couple of months, and we just think very creatively together about all the things that we might do here at the Foundation for the Arts. So this conferences came right out of that thinking together. I want to say special thanks to Barry Sherbeck. Where are you, Barry? Right over there. So Barry provided these wonderful images for us and hung them up for us. He also designed the conference handbook, and he made sure we had sound for Mia yesterday, and just behind the scenes. Just thanks, Barry, for your service. He's not a regular member of our staff team and just has generously volunteered his time. So Jacqueline, the hospitality team here, Brian in communications, Dan, all things technology back there, and then just all the SL Brown staff who make hosting events like this a pleasure. Thank you to all of you. And go ahead. And finally, I thank you for coming. Having an event with no shows would not be much fun. So the only reason we can keep doing this and we have energy for it is that you folk come in increasing numbers, and I hope that you've met some new people here and gained some wisdom and some energy for your own practice and life. I know the last 3 times we've had a conference, many people have remarked, that they left the event feeling energized and ready and wanting to get back to work and not exhausted. So I hope you've been refreshed. So as you leave, go in peace today. I hope your spirits are renewed to engage in the work that God's Spirit has invited us all to do. So have a good afternoon.